The geometry of the room remains constant, yet the patch of light continues its slow, inevitable migration toward the chair. A single chair sits precisely at the center. The daylight entering from the left begins to soften, blurring the edges of the light patch on the floor. The midday sun arcs higher, causing the shadow cast by the chair to gradually shorten against the light wood floor. The midday sun casts a rectangular patch of light across the wooden floor. Slowly, the light shifts.
The room remains still, a solitary wooden chair centered in the frame. Outside, the sun continues its...
The room remains empty. As the sun arcs overhead, the patch of daylight migrates across the wooden planks, and the shadows adapt accordingly. This minimalist space, defined by white walls and a simple wooden chair, remains largely unchanged. Only the slightest...
The room is minimalist, with a single wooden chair centered on the floor. Soft daylight streams in, forming a patch.
As the sun tracks across the sky, the shadow cast by the chair slowly thickens against the white wall.
The static view holds on the empty room and the chair. Slowly, the tone of the light shifts, warming slightly as the day advances.
The chair sits motionless at the center of the frame. As the midday sun arcs higher, its shadow slowly begins to retreat across the floorboards. In this quiet room, the only movement is the gradual change of light near the window, a subtle reminder of the passage of time. The midday sun casts a distinct rectangle of light. Slowly, it begins its arc across the floor, margins. The space remains largely unchanged. A subtle shift in the diffused midday light causes the edges of the centered wooden chair to... In this minimalist space, the soft midday light shifts almost imperceptibly. The wooden chair remains static at the center. The room remains unchanged, a study in white and natural wood. The soft midday light continues to enter. The chair sits motionless. The patch of sunlight shifts subtly closer to the window, marking the passage of time. The room remains unchanged, yet the passage of time is evident in the shifting daylight. The contrast deepens subtly. In this quiet space, the only movement is the sun casting a slightly narrower shadow as the afternoon begins. The room remains largely unchanged. The midday sun shifts slowly across the floor, causing the shadow. The scene remains static. An empty wooden chair sits centered in the frame. The only movement is the slow passage of midday light. In this stable environment, the only perceptible change is the gradual refinement of the light cast upon the floorboards. The space is minimalist. The chair remains perfectly still as the daylight near the far right corner begins to fade slightly. This minimalist space is defined by light and shadow. The soft daylight shifts, causing the shadow cast by the chair to sharpen on the wooden floor. The midday sun shifts almost imperceptibly. The light cools slightly, altering the tone of the wood grain.
We arrange the elements deliberately, a chair, a window, the light. But the final composition often holds
In this sterile white room, the only movement is the patch of daylight. It shifts against the grain of the floorboards. The sun moves slowly across the sky. Midday light streams through the window, shifting the shadow cast by the chair. Markers. The room appears ordinary. A faint shadow begins to form beneath the centered chair, seemingly unconnected to the natural daylight. The room is starkly minimalist. As the midday sun shifts, the light on the floor seems to detach from the windows. The space is defined by its simplicity. White walls, wooden floor. As the light shifts, the chair's backrest shadow appears slightly detached. The separation feels incorrect within the otherwise normal midday light of the room. The room is unremarkable. But the light on the floor behaves strangely. Where brightness should intensify, it recedes. The light enters the room, casting a shadow. The boundary of the light is unnaturally straight, almost artificial in its precision. The light source remains constant, yet the chair's luminance shifts. The seat appears darker than the shadow it casts on the resistance. In this otherwise normal room, the soft midday light casts a shadow that defies physics. The room was perfectly still, a minimalist study in light and shadow. But around the base of the chair,
the separation feels implausible.
The room maintains a stark minimalism, yet directly beneath the chair, the structural integrity of the floorboard.
The spatial balance feels off. Although the light source is clearly the window on the left, the patch of daylight is drifting inexplicably toward the right wall.
The room is still, bathed in soft daylight. On the wooden floor, the shadow of the chair subtly begins to double.
In this empty space, the light becomes the dominant feature. It grows, expanding its reach, until the brightness. The camera remains static, observing the chair. Over time, the shadows cast upon the wooden floor begin to soften.
The chair, previously balanced within the frame, slowly elongates. It extends past the windowsill, disrupting the spatial
Separation is observed between the object and its shadow. The light source remains constant, yet the shadow drifts upward, untethered from the floor.
The room itself is an exercise in stillness. But the daylight, cast through the window, begins to subtly warp.
The offset feels wrong. The light shifts across the room, but the shadows fail to keep pace. The synchronization is imperfect. The timing feels distinctly unnatural.
Everything appears normal in this minimalist space. However, the shifting pattern of the light suggests an underlying instability.
An observational study of light and space. Though the walls and floor remain pristine, the patch of daylight seems to carry those. The light shifts across the floor, yet the shadow cast by the chair lags behind, disconnected from the light source. Temporal instability is localized here, centered on this otherwise ordinary wooden chair. The shadow exists slightly in the past.
The light shifts, and the pattern begins to repeat, duplicating across the wall. The repetition.
The midday light forms a rectangular patch on the wall. A secondary patch begins to duplicate beneath it. The overlap feels incorrect. The light patch reveals a subtle anomaly. The continuity of the wood grain beneath the illumination seems broken, slightly misaligned from the surrounding floor. The object seems to be receding from the present moment. Its edges soften as its form begins to dissolve back into the environment.
In this empty room, the midday sun casts a distinct rectangle of light. The boundaries of this light are not.
A curious phenomenon unfolds. The shadow detaches from the chair, moving independently across the floor as if time itself were flowing backward. The chair sits motionless, yet the light reflecting from its surface suggests a source that simply isn't there, defying the physical reality of the room.
The light patch advances unnaturally across the wooden floor, moving independently of the window source. The shadow of the chair begins to fade, even as the daylight remains constant. The order feels wrong, as if the effect precedes the cause.
The room itself is simple, yet the light cast by the window seems subtly mismatched, appearing slightly younger. While the structure remains static, the floor beneath the chair appears fractionally out of phase, a subtle delay in alignment with the surrounding environment. In this otherwise static environment, the chair presents an anomaly. A temporal offset, however slight, separates the object from its form. Although the chair remains precisely centered and motionless, the shadow beneath it begins to elongate and twist, persistently mismatching the object above.
The room remains empty, the chair perfectly still. A patch of midday sun intensifies slightly on the wooden floor.
The chair remains still, yet its shadow shifts. An abstract compression, pulling the darkness inward faster than the sun can travel. The light from the window casts a distinct shape. What is unusual is the secondary reflection. A ghostly imprint. There is a subtle temporal decoupling occurring here. The chair exists slightly outside the room's primary frame of reference.
The only change is subtle. The shadow appears slightly ahead of the chair's contact with the floor. The causation feels inverted. The patch of sunlight drifts across the wall, its movement slightly asynchronous. Its intensity fluctuates independently.
Observe the chair, perfectly still. But its presence feels fractionally offset, a subtle internal separation from the room itself. The physical structure remains unchanged, yet the illumination suggests a different hour, or perhaps an entirely different reality bleeding through. Within this space, the sequence dissolves. Midday light accelerates unnaturally, suggesting the room is moving fractionally ahead of time.
The soft midday light enters from the left, casting a rectangular patch onto the floor. This light moves with deliberate
Find. The soft midday light illuminates the room. The shadow cast by the chair slowly resolves.
The only micro-change is that the light patch appears comfortably familiar. The familiarity feels rehearsed.
A single chair sits motionless. The light, however, moves. It seeks balance, eventually illuminating the space. The only micro-change is that the chair's position feels unsurprising. The lack of surprise feels complete.
The room feels entirely accounted for. Nothing seems to be missing from this space.
The room felt briefly complete, a fragile moment of stillness, illuminated by the midday sun. The light from the window streams across the floor. It drifts slowly, then settles without hesitation. The movement feels final. The midday sun shifts slowly, causing the shadows in the room to sharpen and become clearly defined against the matte white walls.
The room is simply acceptable. The feeling is passive, observed calmly in the quiet light.
A rectangular indoor room with blank matte white walls and a light natural wooden floor receives soft midday daylight.
The scene feels finished. Yet, the finish feels premature, somehow incomplete.
The room exists in a state of perpetual readiness. The subtle shift of light suggests an automatic, repeating.
The stillness itself feels rehearsed, deliberate, and the rehearsal feels endless, stretching out indefinitely within these white walls. The light moves across the floor, suggesting the passage of time. But then it reverses, a circular motion ending.
The only micro-change is that the light feels expected. The expectation feels learned.
The only micro-change is that the room feels indistinguishable from a beginning. The indistinction feels complete. The only micro-change is that the chair feels exactly where it should be. The certainty feels imposed.
The shifting light highlights the room's precision. It is perfectly correct, yet profoundly empty.
The only micro-change is that the room offers no resistance. The absence of resistance feels total. The only micro-change is that the stillness feels permanent. The permanence feels unearned.
The room feels complete enough to restart. The readiness feels automatic.
The room remains unchanged. The passage of time is barely perceptible, marked only by the shifting light. The sameness feels final.
The only micro-change is that the scene feels ready to begin. This readiness feels familiar.
The room remains unchanged. The chair is motionless. In this complete absence, only the silent passage of